The reason I came to China is kind of interesting. I worked at a small school. I was actually the first math teacher in the high school when the school was just starting as a high school. So we ended up with about 25% of our students were Chinese.
Wow.
And in the school, because the school is located not far from Chinatown in Manhattan in New York. So those students decided that they wanted to form a club, like an Asian cultural club. Not exclusively Chinese, although most of them were Chinese. We had a couple of Indian students and one Japanese student, but primarily they were Chinese, and they wanted to start a club. And in most schools, like ours was no different. In order to have a club, you need to have a faculty advisor. So they came to me and said, would I be the faculty advisor for their club? And I said, of course. And so we started this turned out to be a very successful club. It was one of the most aggressively active clubs in the school. The kids were great. But every year they would say to me, Mr. Koss, you have to go to China. People were so nice, and the gardens were fascinating. And the city just seemed like an interesting place. So the next summer I came back. And I came back and stayed much longer. I stayed for a month because I had summer vacation from teaching. So, and it was actually during that month that I met the Suzhou Ren lady who I married in 2003. So, I mean, that's been a big change in China. It certainly has helped. I think in many ways it's helped to internationalize China because so many foreigners, even if they're from Europe, they also, people from France and Italy and Spain, they also speak English. Usually, it's become such an international language that I think for Chinese people as well, it's really opened the doors. Suzhou has become, so much more westernized, I guess I'll say. There's so many more Western companies here, Western people, Western visitors, Western restaurants, and the shopping malls and everything. That aspect of life has become much easier for me. The other thing that changed a lot was pinyin. I'm very comfortable reading pinyin. I just don't read the Chinese characters. And once the city started putting like pinyin on like all the street signs, for example, it makes things much easier for me to get around because I can actually read the name of the street. I don't have to sort of guess. One of the great things that Suzhou did right from the start was put the SND and the SIP on the outside of the city. So all the large-scale new development and the tall buildings and the skyscrapers and everything that have given Suzhou people the benefit of sort of modern and new, and yet the old is still there. You can enjoy either one, or you can enjoy both. I mean, if you want to live in a modern place, it's there. If you want to live in a traditional place, that's a choice. Yeah. That's still there. If you want to live in one and visit the other, that's also a choice that you have. So that's been, I think, a really, really, probably one of the really great decisions that Suzhou as a city made was to preserve that core and say that's really almost untouchable. At the same time, I wasn't writing to be academic. I was writing for people like me, people who were interested in China. Maybe they visited Suzhou once and wanted to know more, or maybe they were going to come to Suzhou and wanted to know something before they came. It turns out, actually, Suzhou people were more interested than the expats were. I'd say probably 60% of the books that have sold have been to Chinese people. And I think they're just interested in the kind of what the West, not just how I see the city, but even how we would describe their history. Which is really, this book is less about the city itself as it is now and more about and what we think is significant to us in the history, or what we think is worth mentioning compared to maybe what a Chinese writer would write about the history. And of course, since I was writing for Western people, I went out of my way to tell stories. If there was a story that could some way connect someone from the West with Suzhou or with China, then I would go out of my way to write about that, because I wanted people also to understand that I think a lot of Western people think that China and America are sort of like so separate that they've never had any connection, and that's not. It's true going back to the Tang Dynasty, I think, but by the time you get to the Ming Dynasty already, you have Western influences or Western people coming to China for different purposes. Whether it was for the tea trade or for trade or George Lord McCartney going to Beijing and trying to talk the Kangxi Emperor into opening trade between, or I think it was the Qianlong Emperor, into opening trade between the two countries and things. So, but there are some curious connections historically between Western people and, for example, the first Western person to die in the War of Japanese Aggression was actually an American. He was a pilot, and he was here in 1932 trying to train Chinese pilots. His name was Robert Short. And if you go out in the SIP, there's a place south of Dushu Lake where there's actually his statue and a memorial hall, and every year they take the statue out and they have kids come and they talk about patriotism and stuff. So, but you know, these are like very obscure stories that I was able to find, but I made a lot of use of them because I thought it was important for Western people to feel something about not just that China is like this weird, strange, foreign place, but that there has been a relationship between the two countries. You know, even if it wasn't as formal as like government to government, but people to people, there's been more. Yeah.